Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, just a minute. All right, so to recap, the paper that I'm discussing today is the structure of economic news. And the idea of this paper is basically to propose an approach to measuring the state of the economy through the textual analysis of business news. Now, as economists, what most of us do is try to figure out ways to quantify different aspects of the economy. And in this case, they are trying to propose a new approach. Not really, really new, but their applications are kind of novel and interesting. But the idea is that the role of media as an intermediary in portraying what's going on in the society should be something that's captured in the analysis of the economy as well. So this quote in the paper is that news text is a mirror of the prevailing economic issues that are important to both news consumers and producers, and it helps you to understand simultaneously many facets of the state of the economy and how they interact with each other. So that quote, to me at least, essentially summarizes the important role of media and why we should consider it for economic analysis. So how do they do this? They consider a corpus of 800,000 Wall Street Journal articles for the period from 1984 to 2017. And they estimate a LDA topic model. And using the LDA topic model, they do basically broadly two things. Firstly, they summarize the business news and they categorize the news corpus into interpretable topical themes that help you to understand, say, at a given point of time, which topic is getting the most attention in the society. And the second part is that to quantify the news attention, and then to show how this can be applied for a variety of applications. And what they show is that their conclusion, I think this last bullet point is very interesting. They say that these measures extracted through this textual analysis have incremental forecasting power for macroeconomic outcomes above and beyond standard numerical predictors. And I guess this speaks volumes for the need to analyze this kind of societal aspects which have so far been largely ignored in economic analysis. And this also provides like a pathway to see, to maybe include in economic analysis these forgotten aspects. Now, if you are familiar with the literature, you'll probably know that this famous paper by Baker, Bloom, and Davis, QJ 2016, Measuring Economic Policy Uncertainty, this paper sounds very similar to this QJ paper, and even within this current paper, they discuss a lot about the similarities and the differences between the two papers. So hopefully, towards the end of the paper, we'll be able to get into a discussion of why the two papers are different as well. Now, before we move on, let me just start by saying, I mean, being a reading group, this is obviously going to be, I mean, there's probably people in the audience who know more than me about these topic modeling, etc. So you can please feel free to chip in. This is a massive project and there's a lot of ground to cover. Hopefully I'll be able to do justice to this paper. And their topic modeling approach is somewhat standard. Therefore, from the presentation, I'm not going to spend much time on the theoretical model because also, as David said, the last reading group, we discussed the technicalities of topic modeling. But I find the applications are really novel and interesting. So hopefully we'll learn a lot by looking at the pretty graphs that they provide throughout the paper. Right, so to start off with the data they are using, they use all the articles published in the Wall Street Journal from 1984 to 2017. Now this data, similar data have been applied in the textual analysis literature. For example, in Manela and Moreira, they use the Wall Street Journal data set, but they only include abstracts of the front page articles. So it's like a very restricted sample of the large Wall Street Journal data set. Now, in Baker, Bloom, and Davis, they study, again, a large collection of newspapers, but their analysis is restricted to articles that have a limited set of predefined key terms. So they don't look at all articles. They only look at articles which include these key terms. So this paper, by contrast, is broader because it doesn't go into the analysis with any predefined terms. It just lets the data speak, and it considers the entire corpus of the Wall Street Journal. Now, they do a number of steps to homogenize the data sample. They say that prior to 1984, the data set is limited to article abstract. Therefore, they exclude those articles. And in terms of the terms themselves, they exclude single letter words, and they only consider articles that are that appear in the 3 core sections, because, as you know, newspapers sometimes they have special sections that only appear seasonally, or that are there for a few years and then disappear. So these are not consistent. Therefore, they exclude that kind of non-continuing sections and only look at the 3 core sections, and they exclude articles that appear in the weekends, non-economic content, and sports, leisure, that kind of stuff is excluded because their focus is basically on economic news. And then once they've extracted this kind of articles that they want to use, they engage in a light lemmatizing of the derivative words. So, I mean, I guess these are like, in a sense, standard stuff to do in the topic modeling, because say you don't want to have the variation of the same word captured in the topic modeling. So they look at trailing S's with, just replace that with S, and IES with Y, that kind of light lemmatizing of derivative words. And then after that, for the final data set, they include all the resultant unigrams and bigrams occurring in the data set. The final data set consists of about 800,000 articles, and that has about 18,400 unique terms. David, as I mentioned, I cannot see the chat, so if there are any questions, please let me know.
Will do.
Okay, thanks. Right. So that's what I discussed so far was the kind of data that they're using. Now, in terms of the topic model, they are using a LDA topic modeling approach as per Bly. And if anybody is really interested in the specifics of this, I suggest I refer you to the last reading group's excellent presentation by Chris, where he discussed this in detail. Now, the idea is that you study a corpus in a bag of terms, a bag of words form, and you try to reduce the magnitude or the dimension of this bag of words to a matrix W, which is a T by V matrix, where T is the number of different articles in the corpus, and V is the vocabulary of the unique terms that are appearing in the totality of the articles. So obviously, as you can imagine, when you have almost 800,000 articles and lots of unique words, it's a massive magnitude that we're talking about. So LDA basically helps you to reduce the magnitude. And what LDA needs is basically first the data set, and secondly the number of topics. So that as an input to LDA, we have to guide the LDA into tell the model how many topics are we looking at building within this corpus. So what the author says that they use a data-driven approach to select the number of topics. So basically, it's a trial and error method. They look at a variety of models for the number of topics, starting from 50 topics to 250 in increments of 10, and then select the model with the highest Bayes factor, which is basically the goodness of fit of the model. And just because they want to have some sort of external validity about the number of topics that they're selecting, they do a complementary analysis where they select based on a 10-fold cross-validation. So here what they do is they partition the sample into 10 validation samples, and then re-estimate the topic model on the data 10 times, and each time you exclude one of the 10 samples, and then evaluate the fit on the left out sample. And for this, the measure of goodness of fit that they use is the average log likelihood value. As you can see here on the right hand side panel, this panel just plots the goodness of fit for the key method, which is the Bayes factor method, as well as the cross validation. And the authors say that, and we can see over here that the peak is achieved at somewhere between 170 to 180. And they say that a manual inspection also identifies 180 as a sensible number of topics, and therefore they choose the number of topics A to be at 180. And what we see here on the left-hand side is the number of articles and the number of terms of the corpus of the WSJ articles over the period. Right. Right. So before they present the main output of their model, they talk about a few caveats. So first they say that, we estimate a model on 180 topic specifications, and we are just using this single estimation to use the full data sample. It's a huge sample, and therefore, there are certain limitations on what they can do. And because it's higher dimensional, it is impossible to report the full scope of these estimates. And to help users to understand more about their method, they have developed this interactive website, structureofnews.com, which is quite nice if you are interested in having a look. And also they mentioned that LDA does not order topics in any manner, unlike say principal component analysis, and therefore whatever the order that they present their work is their own choice. Right. So now we are moving on to the output of the model and the application. So the first output of this model is to identify the terms that fall within a particular topic. So basically, we want to see which kind of articles can we associate with a given topic. And to do that, they again use a nice stepwise process. First, they say, there are some words that are common to many topics. So for example, something like price. The word price can be applied in the sense for a range of topics. It could be like industrial production, or it could be macroeconomy. But the word by itself doesn't tell us exactly a clear indication of which topic it refers to. But there are certain other topics which are more topic specific. Sorry, other terms which are more topic specific. For example, pharmaceutical. Then we know that it relates to a particular kind of overall bigger topic, or iron ore. So the question here is, which terms are the most diagnostic of the thematic content of topic K? So basically, the objective of this exercise is to identify the articles containing terms that relate to a particular topic, which will help the authors therefore to classify a particular article as being of a particular topic. So they say that their terms are entirely unsupervised, and they don't tell the model anything as to how it should choose these terms, and the model itself chooses the terms. And once the terms are retrieved, it is on the authors to attach labels to a term list as they see fit based on their understanding of the term list. Like, for example, here they talk about the features of the term list that they extract from their model. And one of the examples they give is this set of 10 terms that they have extracted, which come as a bundle. So bonus, base salary, total compensation, pay package, compensation package, etc., up to bonuses. So this is like a bundle of terms. And now when the authors retrieve this, they have a look at the terms and then label this as being an executive pay topic. And the authors mentioned quite a few times that in their model, the terms that they retrieved are more often than not easily recognized as belonging to a particular topic. And they claim that they hardly ever see any mixed topics, like mixed terms, like lists of terms where the topics are listed mixed, but rather the purity of the topic is more or less established in the term list most of the time. And they say that the purity of the topic also extends beyond the first 10 terms to even up to the next 20 or 30 terms in a list. So, but they do say one thing. They say now this idea that there are no mixed topics at the optimal number of topics of 180 holds. But they say that if, let's say, if you go down to 50 topics, which is obviously not optimal as per the model, but let's say you run the model for 50 topics, then you observe that the term lists are bundled together. So the topics are then broader, but you still don't find that the topics are mixed. So it's not like you'll have apples and oranges in one, but you will probably have green apples and red apples in one bucket. So that's this is how they say, how they basically try to convince the reader that their model is able to identify or able to maintain the purity of the topics as per the term list that they generate. And
Ashani,
yes,
I have a question
yes,
regarding, so mixed here refers to, well, if the 20 top words or top terms in each topic are completely distinct from each other, or that it's like, or that it's more like, well, the set is not completely similar. So you never have the 20 top words the same in any of the other topics, because on the slide before you also showed, right, that price and company are super frequent. So I'm still like kind of wondering, I mean, it's not your paper, I was just wondering
yeah.
what actually mixed means. So obviously there might be, if mixed just means, well, out of the 20 terms, you never have one topic which has exactly the same 20 terms, but 19 might be similar. So they still say, well, they are distinct from each other. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yes, I think their explanation for mixed is when you see a list of terms, you can easily label it as being X, and there is no, like, there's no term within those first 20 terms as being not X. Does that make sense? Um,
kind of. I mean, it seems quite subjective, but yes.
Yeah, that's right, because that's why I spent so much time on highlighting the word. They say things like it's easily recognizable and the purity and mixed and those kind of things. So it seems very subjective. But what, like, I think from my understanding of the paper, what they try to say is, if you say get a list of the first 20 terms, there is no doubt in their mind that all of them can be linked to a particular topic, and you don't see a term that is completely different to the others. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so that's the key feature of the term list. So basically, that's how they basically try to convince the reader that their model is doing what they expected it to do. And they also say that most of the topics come out with no subjective bias. So it's just an appraisal-free, very objective topics, like something like airlines or Federal Reserve or China. So there's no sentiment attached to it for most of the topics. But there are some where the subject itself carries a value judgment. So, for example, say terrorism is associated with bad news. And there's also a little bit, like a tiny bit of sentimental topics, which when combined with something else, is able to give you some sort of intuition about the sentiment behind it. For example, something like problems or concerns, which by themselves may not mean much, but if you combine that with another topic, then that can give you a sense of sentiment attached to that article or the event. Right, so now, if you recall, they said their optimal number of topics was 180, and then they got the term list for each of these 180 topics, and then the authors assigned a topic label for each of these term lists. And what they say is all of these topics can, in a sense, now this is at a very, very fine degree of granularity. We can then agglomerate these categories step by step into broader categories, which can also be somewhat useful depending on the kind of application. So they say that the hierarchy, looking at the hierarchy of how the topics topics stand by themselves, as well as how these topics are connected to each other, is an important useful check on the semantic validity of the model. And what they say is the topics and their connectivity are also again data driven, and they assign meta topic labels to these agglomerated topics, like meta topics, which are agglomerated topics. The assignment of manual of titles is again manual in that sense. Now, this is basically their hierarchy of the taxonomy of WHA news. So on this side, what you see are the 180 topics that where at which their model was optimized. And then, so these are obviously data driven. They didn't guide the model to achieve these topics, but the topics were chosen, sorry, the term lists were chosen by the model itself, and then the authors manually labeled these topics. And then if you see, they link these topics between with others which are more relevant to each other, and then they are able to basically keep linking them and agglomerating them so they become broader topics. So their idea is that broadly the corpus can be segregated into news about the economy, that's one, and the other one is news about politics and culture. And then news about the economy can again be segregated into financial intermediaries, financial markets, corporate earnings, etc. And then you can still keep identifying separate groups until you come to the very fine level of granularity. And then over here, politics and culture, which is the broadest category, you can then segregate that as culture and then politics, and you keep dissecting the topics until you are then able to reach the 180 topics at a very fine degree of granularity. So basically, what they are saying is this is one of the main outputs of the paper, and the idea is that at a very fine granularity, you identify exactly which terms define particular topics, and then you are able to keep identifying the network or the connectedness of these topics until you can reach a very broad understanding of what's happening in the economy as represented by the news text. Right, so do we have any questions? Okay, so if there's
just
no
one,
okay.
Is there a sense of the size of topics? Because they are not 1/180, but some topics may be much more dominant and much more frequent. And there could be one on whatever, Aborigines, that the WSJ just writes about once, but it's a clearly defined topic and it's super tiny in the big corpus.
Yes, so in terms of getting an idea about the size of the topic, I think the size of a topic varies depending on the time that you are considering as well. So I guess the answer to your question will come in the second part of the analysis, where they look at the attention to topics over time. But in the first part of the analysis, they are basically trying to develop this hierarchical taxonomy of topics and how they relate to the broad meta topic. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe in the next slide you'll get, yeah. Okay, so now that they've obtained this, what are the main topics that are discussed across the corpus of WSJ articles, the second output of the model is to identify how, how does the attention to these topics vary over time or over different aspects of the economy. So basically, they look at a number of very interesting applications with a very nice presentation that hopefully we'll be able to discuss in a little while. So what they're saying is by identifying the attention paid to a particular topic in the economy at a given point of time, that gives us a sense of what's going on in the economy, and this can then be fed into quantitative empirical investigations of what's happening in the economy, and therefore, as I initially said, there may be some areas in the economy where data is scarce, and maybe going forward, this kind of data is something that we can apply to explore such economic hypothesis. So, so basically, the idea here is to look at the attention of given to a particular topic at the article level and over time. Right. So, firstly, they look at news attention to particular topics in a given month. And they obviously, now we are talking about 180 topics. So the authors claim in the paper it's somewhat impossible to give you 180 plots of each topic, but they give a few samples and explain how it works. Now, for example, they say there are certain topics which are always in the news. So some recurrent topics which appear consistently through the sample. For example, something like Federal Reserve. As you can see here, from 1984 to 2017, the topic Federal Reserve has constantly been in the news. Of course, at some points very much higher than the others, but it's always been in the news. Now, what you see, that's a black line you see. Now, the blue line you see is within the Federal Reserve topic, what are the key terms that that constituted this topic. And so here they list the 20 key terms under the Federal Reserve topic. You can see Greenspan, Alan Greenspan, Yellen, federal funds rate, etc., etc. And the blue line basically shows the standardized impact or the standardized contribution of these terms. So starting with Greenspan and Alan Greenspan, that had a very high impact, and maybe 0.88 impact coming from the term race interest. So basically, these are the 20 key terms that constitute this topic Federal Reserve, which is, according to the authors, a recurrent topic that appears consistently through the sample. Now, there are certain other kinds of topics which are seasonal, and the best example the authors give is on elections, where it works like a clockwork pattern. It peaks every 4 years, and then there is a secondary peak every 2 years, which is the electoral cycle in the US. So again, they say now this is one kind of a topic that makes the news, which is seasonal in nature. And the other kind of topic they talk about is called episodic topics, which are most of the time dormant, but something happens and the interest in this topic increases. For example, natural disasters. Most of the time it's dormant, and then suddenly a natural disaster happens. The attention in the news to natural disasters then peaks and falls again after a while. So in terms of news attention, to classify the topics, they use these three particular topic types. Recurrent, seasonal, and episodic topics is how they mention that. Now, as I said, the authors claim in the paper that this is 180 topics. It might not be feasible to give plots for each of these, and what they're trying to do here is basically to plot the topic, the first two topics, or the two largest topics which received attention in the news in a given month. So over here you see that number one means that during that month this topic received the highest attention, and number two means during that month this topic achieved the second highest attention. So the authors claim that most of the time it's political and economy related events that receive the highest attention, which is what we see here. So treasury bonds, elections, international exchanges, they are appearing as the topic with the highest attention in most of the months. And then even the second highest attention is achieved by or attained by this kind of political and economy related news. So this is basically the authors claim this to be a snapshot of which topics receive attention. So in a sense, this basically maybe somewhat linked to Sasha's question before, to identify the magnitude of attention paid to topics at a given point of time. Right, so this is one of the first pretty graphs that this paper provides. And so this here they say, okay, so we have this set of meta topics. If you recall earlier, I said they have 180 very fine granular topics, and then they cluster them at different meta topic levels. So over here they have these 23 meta topics, and basically they show the attention retained by these 23 meta topics over the sample period. And they say, look, this looks like the attention to these topics has been more or less constant over the period. It doesn't look like, you know, there's high volatility in terms of these topics that received attention. But they say that if you this topic, this graph in a sense is a misrepresentation at a macro level, because this is not what's happening at a very at a zoomed in level. So over here, what they're trying to do is to zoom in to the meta topic and see at this zoomed in level, do we still see the kind of stability that we saw before, or is there some sort of variation? Now, I'm sorry, the words are very small. I try to make it as large as possible, but it's not possible, but I can read out to you. So in this political leaders meta topic, one of the striking distinctions is over here. Now, this topic is Clinton. And so in the period of 1994 onwards, obviously when Clinton was in power and with the scandal associated with him, so this received a lot of attention. And therefore, I mean, likewise, you have lots of other topics that received attention, and the fluctuations are huge as opposed to the somewhat stable figure that we saw previously. Now, over here, financial risk in the bank sector, financial risk is very high. So this is 2007. From 2007 onwards, the concept or the topic financial risk and the topic mortgage receives high attention as opposed to the others. Now, in terms of technology, what this over here, what we have is gradually the attention on internet and mobile phones has increased. And when you started at the beginning of the sample, we see that computers received a lot of attention, but towards the end of the sample, the attention on computers is very low, and this has been taken over by focus on internet and mobile phones. So this basically gives us a nice overview of the structural change of the topics that are being discussed in the economy from the beginning of the sample period towards the end of the sample period, and basically shows how the technology we use has shifted over time. And then in terms of international affairs, at the beginning, China is not so prominent, but come to the end of the sample period, China is receiving a lot of attention in the news, and of course their attention on Russia is also somewhat volatile, but still prominent towards the end of the sample. So yeah, I personally found this these four graphs very interesting, because of course we assume that I mean currently we know mobile phones are important and the internet is important, but we don't really realize that computers have had their attention overtaken so much by these alternatives to technology, and this basically gives you the trends that have happened over the sample period. Right, so up to now, what I discussed was the news attention given to these topics at a particular point in time. The second part of this news attention that the authors do is basically news attention at the article level. So in each article, they try to figure out what is the topic that is mostly dominant within a given article, and then they try to plot that nicely. May I ask how much time do I have? 20 minutes?
20 minutes, yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, so here is news attention at the article level. Basically, what they're looking at is the 800,000 articles by 180 topics. So it's a massive matrix. And their proposal, proposition rather, is that an article is a mixture of topics, and within an article, some topics may be more dominant than the others, and thus this relative importance of topics within a given article enable us to label an article as belonging to a particular topic, and then they also want to see how these topics interact within and between articles. So in order to do that, they visualize this topic mixture of each article using a T-distributed stochastic nearest neighbor embedding. And what this does is, now obviously because there are 180 dimensions, topics or dimensions, but obviously that would be very difficult to visualize. What they're doing is they assign a two-dimensional coordinate to each article, so that the nearness of that article on the plane basically is reflective of the nearness of the article within the full 180 dimensional space. If I'm not mistaken, I think Sasha posted something related to this with respect to his project yesterday, and maybe this might be of interest to Sasha as well. So over here, basically, the authors assign a topic, like a color to each topic, and then each article is colored in the topic that is most prominent in that article, and then visualize these topics in another very pretty graph like this. So on the top here, what we have is basically the collection of all the articles in the corpus, and each color is a topic, and each article gets a color based on the topic that is most prominent within it. And they say, now if it's a topic that is interconnected with a lot of other topics, then such topics should take central stage in this plane. And if you're a topic that does not connect much with other topics, then you should be in the periphery. So over here, what they see is, they look at on the bottom, on the left-hand side, they look at articles which are very pure in terms of their content. So they basically have one dominant topic which does not interact with other topics as much, and those kind of articles, the authors claim, would appear at the periphery. But if you have mixed articles, that means where you have a few dominant topics within an article, then that means those topics are very interconnected, and those would then appear in the center as reflected in the right-hand side plane. So basically, I think this is an important application if you're trying to look at the connectedness between topics in terms of, let's say, some sort of network analysis, and you want to identify the degree of connectivity between topics. I think this is a really cool application in a sense to tease out what kind of topics will have higher connectivity as opposed to others which are more on the periphery. Now over here, this basically gives you, so over here we had the total mix of articles, but here they're trying to tease out individual topics. So in this top left, we have bankruptcy, top middle, we have elections, then we have China. So they're trying to plot the different topics separately, one in each plane. And we see that some topics are well spread. That means it's highly connected with the topics in the corpus, for example, like Federal Reserve. Then some others are not so well connected. For example, elections, it's only, it's not as spread as Federal Reserve. So this plot basically gives you like the relative connectivity between topics. It's more clearly visible as opposed to the mix. Now this one again is an important visualization, because here what they look at is all the articles where the dominant topic was the Federal Reserve are taken and plotted here, and the colors are assigned on the second dominant topic in these articles. So the first dominant topic is Federal Reserve. And in these articles, what is the second most important topic? Then we see that the Federal Reserve topic by itself is quite well spread across the plane. And under that, there are quite a few interesting topics that also come up, such as economic growth and China and mortgages. So within the Federal Reserve topic, there are certain other subtopics which are again of interest. So this is more like a vertical connectivity of topics. Right, so up to now, the authors just looked at identifying, okay, what's the news attention at a particular point of time, what's the news attention on a particular topic in a given article, but now they're trying to use these, the topics that they obtained to identify the state of the economy. They're trying to see if they basically correlate with any of the standard economic indicators that we use in our analysis. So, but obviously the problem is that because the topic, I mean, obviously their textual data is very high dimensional, OLS would lead to overfitting. So to address that problem, they apply a heavy lasso penalization, and they set the lasso penalty parameter to enable exactly 5 topics to have non-zero values. And then use these 5 topics in a correlation to identify which of these 5 actually have a statistically significant correlation with these macroeconomic indicators. So over here on the left-hand side, we have the industrial production growth correlated with the topic, which the 5 topics which were selected by the as per the lasso penalization. Then also they reflect, they have the visual representation, and they show that the actual values and the predicted values are somewhat correlated. And out of the 5 topics that they pick, that the model picks for industrial production growth, the only 2 are statistically significant at the 5% level. So recession and oil market seem to be correlated with industrial production growth, and this model can explain about 22% of the industrial production growth. And then over here we have a similar correlation analysis for employment growth, and again they find that there are 3 important variables that are statistically significantly correlated with employment growth: recession, rail, trucking and shipping, and then Iraq. Of course the model can explain about 59% of the employment growth. So basically, what they're trying to say is that, you know, the topics that they extract from their model are nicely correlated with these important macroeconomic indicators. And then they do the same for financial activity, and they have these plots to show that yes, our topic models are able to actually capture what explains these financial activity in a traditional sense. And also in terms of industry volatility, these are stock market prices for, or other standard deviations of stock returns for these different industries. And again, they say that their model is able, the topics that they extract from the model and which automatically get selected in the lasso penalization have a nice correlation with these industry volatility measures as well.
Can I ask you one thing about the previous one? The frequency is at what level? Year,
monthly.
Quarter, week, monthly.
Monthly, yes.
And on the previous one, the one on economic growth, there is recession. And I was thinking about the Economist has this R index, where they essentially claim that as the word recession appears, just the word, it's not sophisticated, they've been doing it for decades. As the word recession appears in newspaper articles, it's a leading indicator of recessions, a leading. That would suggest you would see an even higher correlation if you have whatever, 1 month forward thing, or 2 months or 6 months. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a very valid point. They don't look at any lags or leads in their analysis, but in the next section, when they're looking at financial frictions, they say they look at how the words recession can somewhat capture a recession happening even a few years before. So maybe that is probably the only situation where I saw them using recession as a lead. But in this correlation analysis, no, they don't use the lags or leads of these terms. But I think that's a very valid point. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So now in the previous section, they looked at the correlation between these topics and their and these economic indicators. Now in the next section, they look at trying to predict these variations. So they have obviously they have the actual growth that happen in a particular variable, and they're trying to predict this growth using their topic models, the topics that they achieve from the models, and then they're trying to see whether there is a significant correlation in terms of, or whether they're successful in terms of identifying these predicted IP growth. So over here, what we see is the black line is the attention given to the news in terms of the article recession and the topic of recession, and the red line is the predicted IP growth as per their model. And they say that they can identify 6 major instances where the lead article in that month was related to recession, and they say that this fact that is captured by their model is in a sense reflected in the IP growth as well. So basically over here in this arrow, the article that received highest attention in terms of recession was this one: survey finds sharp drop in confidence of consumers after stock market crash. And so this is that point, and after that basically the dip is explained by this article. And again here they find another article that explains this dip, and they're saying that this allows them to basically engage in a narrative related to what's happening in the economy. And of course this is just one application. There could be a number of other topics that could have similar effects, and they also do a similar plot for the oil market topic, which again shows like they're able to identify if there's a dip. They're able to identify that this is the article that relates to the dip, and this maybe relates to the behavior of the economic variable as well. Right, so very quickly, they also look at identifying financial risk, looking at the credit premium, basically the interest rate, the difference in the interest rate between the 5-year interest rate swap and the 5-year treasury rate. So treasury rates are almost risk-free, and then you have this very high risk instrument. They look at the difference between those interest rates and try to again do a correlation analysis. And over here, this is where I mentioned earlier, they look at the financial frictions in terms of levels and not growth. And if you look at this, the red in this heat map, the red dots basically show events that increase financial frictions, and blue areas show events that tone down financial frictions. And what the authors claim is, as early as 2004, the topic recession made the news, and it could be that the first basically the initiation of the news attention of recession happened as early as 2004, although the recession itself happened in 2008. And they also say that in terms of elections, usually elections, say 2004, 2008 elections, are identified as increasing the financial risk of the economy, but surprisingly, the 2012 election is associated with a decline in financial risk, although they don't comment much on it. They do point to this fact that the previous 2 elections have increased financial risk, but over here in 2012, that election is identified as having reduced the financial risk. Now, this heat map is considering these topics at levels, but then they also look at the changes, basically the growth rate, and they say that looking at the growth rates helps you to even delve deeper into the finer details, and as you can see, the more topics are becoming prominent in this plot as opposed to the previous one. And yeah, so things like acquisitions of business or financial activity, trading are what appear to have these blue plots, which are identified as reducing financial frictions. Right, so I have 3 minutes. So in the first slide, if you recall, I mentioned that this paper is very similar to what Baker, Bloom, and Davis do in their 2016 QJ paper, where they use, again, WSJ articles to develop the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index. But their method, according to these authors, their method is more restricted because they have 10 predefined terms that they use to identify whether an article contributes to policy uncertainty or not. And therefore, these authors say that's a very restricted model. And although it gives the model a lot of discipline, the outcomes are obviously subject to misspecification bias. But what these authors do is they just let the data speak without giving any guidance to the data. So what comes out, although it's maybe less disciplined and it takes more work, it is not prone to misspecification bias as it was with the Baker Bloom, as it was with the Baker Bloom and Davis paper. But they say that, of course, their models, the results of their model also is very similar to what Baker, Bloom, and Davis achieved, but because of the inherent problems in the Baker, Bloom, and Davis analysis, their model and their methodology is identified to be a lot stronger and less biased. Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat.
Yes.
Can you see the?
Yeah, I can see. In the prediction exercises, do they address the issue of future economy influencing the topic assignment? For example, Timothy Pickering is assigned to the topic financial crisis. But if you observe an article mentioning Timothy before 2008, you will not assign it to the topic. Okay, that's an interesting point, but from my understanding, they haven't mentioned anything about retrospective assignment.
So basically, like the idea behind the prediction is that like we have a set of signals now, and we want to understand what will happen next, right? Now, if we have things like, if we observe things like Timothy Geithner or credit default swaps, we think probably it's financial innovation or government or something like that. But in their in their assignment, they have Timothy Geithner, credit default swaps, bailouts, bankruptcy, stuff like that. All that lumped in the topic financial crisis. But that assignment happened with the knowledge of what happened in 2007 and in 2008. Yes. Right? So basically, if we just restrict our analysis to the contemporaneous signals, then we cannot make predictions, because the assignment of because the topic assignment like depends on us knowing the future.
Yeah, no, I get your point, but I didn't come across any point in the paper where they discuss something like this, and from my understanding, it's an ex post assignment of these things than us knowing what happened, as opposed to being completely agnostic about. Yeah, but yeah, I'm not sure if there are other papers that have done that also, because that would actually, yeah, no, I'm not aware of any other papers that do something like that as well. But in this paper, I did not come across something like that. But I get that's a very valid point, which maybe someone has answered already. But yeah.
Generally, do they slice data by sub-period and do stuff? Because I was thinking about the Clinton period. If you look at specific years, probably Monica Lewinsky would be 10% of title pages. But in the big picture over 30 years, it's minuscule and she wouldn't appear.
Yeah. No, they
I don't think they do, right? Because if you look at the Federal Reserve, or if the Federal Reserve topic, right, you have Yale and you have Greenspan, you have all those former.
Yeah, Greenspan.
Yeah,
so they have. Yeah, I don't think they do that, but I guess in terms of the data available, because the data is, I don't know to what level the data is interactive in their website. So what they say is, there's so much we can do with this data, and there's only so much we can write in the paper. Therefore, have a look at the data in the website. But I didn't find the website so interactive. Or maybe they do it and they don't report it, but it's definitely not there in the paper. Yeah.
Also, I may have missed it, but I mean, they talk about Baker, Bloom, Davis paper, and they say, well, it's really restrictive. They just look first at keywords and so on. But I was wondering, do they actually do any kind of simulation that supports their? I mean, they could just, right? Like they could just compare those two models.
So they have. So basically, they have just
maybe.
They have this where they try to basically compare their model with the Baker, Bloom, and Davis model, and they say, look, we get very similar results as with them, but in terms of doing in terms of distinguishing themselves from Baker, Bloom, and Davis, this is basically all they have. So they basically say, look, Baker, Bloom, and Davis does this. It has its advantages, it has its limitations, but we do something better. And although, of course, the limitation is that it takes a lot of effort in terms of doing this, our method is superior. So that's basically what they explain. And no, they don't go into any more detail on that. Yeah. So because we're so familiar with the Baker, Bloom, and Davis paper, I think for anybody who reads the abstract or the introduction, the first question that comes is, how would you distinguish yourself from Baker, Bloom, and Davis? I mean, obviously this paper does a lot of work, it's massive, and Baker, Bloom, and Davis is somewhat related to economic policy uncertainty only, whereas these people have a number of broad applications, etc., etc. But in terms of the actual model, they just say theirs is more restricted than ours. Yeah, but I guess in terms of applications, I think this paper is, I mean, exposed it might not look much, but ex ante to think of these things and to actually develop these visualizations and the connectivity, I think is quite impressive.
Oh yes, I mean, it obviously saves the human coding, right? So that, I guess, is the big advantage, even though probably the data wrangling kind of maybe kills the advantage a bit, but
yeah.
what a massive size. Again, sorry to ask to dwell on it, but I was wondering, do they also do like maybe also relate to Maxime to do like out of sample predictions? Because I mean, they show this graph with like, right, like what is predictive with this in IP growth, but I mean, it seems like the classic, they predicted 7 out of 2 recessions correctly, right? Like,
yeah, to be honest, I think their strength is in terms of modeling the topics and then modeling the connectivity between topics. I think they have given quite a bit of attention to visualizing, then getting the connectivities and networks and all that. But in terms of, prediction and economic indicators, I mean, of course they do a lot, but I guess that's something that, compared to the other part of the paper, that's something where they could actually improve a little bit, but still they do a lot. And yeah, I mean, it's already a massive paper, and I don't know if it can get any bigger than that.
Well, no, it's super impressive. I just like, well, is it worth the trouble, right? I guess that's what they have to convince the reader about, right? They do all this massive, which is super cool and super impressive, especially all these plots. When I looked at it, I was like, well, this is
so pretty.
crazy, and it's like, it's still informative, like a cool way to visualize.
To actually reduce the dimension, like 180 dimensions, and then to actually plot something in a 2D plane, but to still portray the same connectivity within the 180 dimension, I think it's pretty impressive. And yeah.
Any more questions from? I guess not. Then thank you very much for this great presentation. And for picking this paper.
It's not my work. I wish it was, but yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It wasn't. No, it was great.
Okay,
Thank you,
that gives me a lot of confidence. Okay.
But it could have been.
Okay, I'll then share my slides and this recording with the authors.
Thank you, Ashani.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.